Shirt show. All right, let's go.
Shirt show! Talking shirt! Shirt show! Talking shirt! Shirt show! Talking shirt! Shirt show! Shirt man! All right! Episode 265 of Shirt Show! We're talking with Gary from Printing United Alliance in Pennsylvania. Let's go!
If you're new here, my name is Dylan. I am the owner of Upstate Merch and the host of the Shirt Show podcast. My guest today was Gary Jones. He is with the Printing United Alliance. He focuses a lot on like OSHA and health and safety related topics. Christina and I went to the Apparelist event a couple weeks ago in Nashville and got to see Gary speak. And he was talking about some of these OSHA related topics, and it instantly made me want to have him on. Like, funny guy, just had a lot of information, and you knew he was like holding so much stuff. So I really wanted to get him on and just kind of dive deep into all these topics. Today we went over everything I could think of that had to do with, you know, how to look out for things, what are the most common mistakes, how do we fix them, what do we do if we get in trouble. There was a lot of different things that we dove into, and me and Gary really could kind of go off on tangents, and I tried really hard to bring us back and rein it in. But yeah, this one had a lot of information and there's a lot more to learn. So there might be a part 2, or you might just join the Alliance and talk to Gary yourself. He was a great guy. Loved getting in everything with him. And I really hope you guys enjoy what he has to say. We kind of finished with this, but I think the biggest thing was, yeah, you can be scared of the big bad boogeyman that is OSHA, but also the goal is to keep you and your staff and everybody safe. So if you can take something away from this episode, it's, you know, how to run things better and keep your people with all of their fingers. If you're looking to join a community of like-minded shop owners, join us on our Discord channel, shirtshowofficial.com/Discord, or you can find it on the YouTube. You can find it on Instagram on our links. It's just a community of screen printers. It's open. It's free. There's an app on your phone. You can do it on your desktop. There's no judgment. You can ask anything you want to ask. There's no trolls. We get rid of those. So if you want to join and learn about anything or have a community of people that you can just talk whatever shop you want to talk, this is the place to go. So again, go to shirtshowofficial.com/Discord to join. If you enjoyed listening to this podcast, the best thing you can do to support us is to share the show. Tell your friends, post it on socials. Give us the thumbs up. If you're watching this on YouTube, take 2 seconds, please, and give it a thumbs up. Leave us a comment. Let me know something you learned from the episode or something you want to hear more about. Please take 2 seconds. Do that for me. It means a lot to me. It lets me know you guys are here and listening. Or you can DM me directly on Shirt Show Official Instagram. It's me who answers. So if you got a cool story or you just want to shoot the shit, I'm there to talk. This show would not be possible without our amazing partners. Frank. It all starts with a screen. Whether it's new stretches or restretches, Frank and his team do it the best. To find out more, go to graphicscreenfashion.com, ffffrank.com, or greatfuckingscreens.com. Cleaning screens is no fun, but EasyWay makes it way more funner. Their line of eco-friendly chemicals and equipment make reclaiming screens a whole lot easier. Right now is a great time to check them out because they have a new monthly giveaway where you can have a chance to win $250 in product credit. Head over to easyway.com/giveaway to enter today. EasyWay, it's the easiest way. They actually just posted on Instagram the winner from last month, and that person's getting $250 in credit. So go check it out. It's easy, it's free, and you can get some free chemical. Graphics is your source for production-ready digital art and remote art staffing. They can help any size shop from just starting out to enterprise level. Looking to add a hero to your art department? Check them out at graphxsource.com. If you're looking to add somebody to your art team to help with SEPs or help with mock-ups or anything like that, they also do a ton of stuff with digitizing for embroidery stuff, and they show you sew-outs of everything. It's kind of a no-brainer if you need to add to that department. Yeah, keep your one person, or if you got somebody who's out for a couple months, Graphic Source there to help. SNS Activewear and Alpha Broder are integrating to become your premier partner in the apparel industry. With one website, one purchase order, and 14 distribution centers with over 100 beloved brands, you can streamline your ordering and hit free freight faster than ever. SNS has 1 to 2 day shipping with the lowest error rate in the industry, which should be the one thing that you're like, shit, yeah, I can get it tomorrow, and there's a lot less errors. Don't forget they have combined net term limits to benefit your business like never before. Be sure to order your blanks from ssactivewear.com. Today's episode is brought to you by American Apparel, makers of the iconic 2001. Soft, fitted, and always in style, this shirt has been the go-to for brands, bands, and print shops for decades. If you want a shirt people actually want to wear, start with the 2001. For over 90 years, Stahls has been the leading choice among apparel decorators for their heat transfer materials, heat press equipment, and custom transfer services. Not only do they offer some of the best products, but they are always looking to innovate and educate on our industry on all things heat press. Head over to stahls.com to order your transfers and check them out on YouTube to be taught a thing or two. Again, if you guys could take a second, give us a like, thumbs up, leave us a comment. I want to hear from you. That's the thing that keeps me going is your stories and hey, I love this about this episode, or hey, you were a fucking idiot for this in this episode. Just let me know. I want to hear from you. So if you could do that for me, do me that solid. I'd appreciate it. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. It was really great. I love this series, this last episode and this one about just shit you can actually learn and implement to make you a better shop. So enjoy the episode. Thanks, guys. Hey, Gary, how are you?
Good. How are you?
Oh, I'm good. So I had a friend of yours on last week, and we talked about HR.
Oh, Adrian. You had Adrian?
Yeah, Adrian.
Yeah, Adrian and I worked together for quite some time. And yeah, she's a great resource for the industry for sure.
Yeah, she just had a ton of stuff, and like when I do the show, like I'm learning as well. So it was nice to go through everything with her, and it ended up turning basically into like a therapy session of her, being like, well, you should do this, or, hey, this or the other thing. So with my own shop, I kind of had to reflect a little bit. Yeah,
she's excellent. I've really enjoyed working with her. I think we've probably worked together. It's got to be, I think, close to 10 years now.
Dang.
Yeah. I didn't look it up, but it's got to be close to 10 years, at least 10 years I worked with her. So yeah, we really complement each other very well because I do environmental health, safety, and sustainability. She focuses on HR, but as you're probably aware of, a lot of HR folks also have safety responsibilities.
Yeah,
so there's really a great crossover. So we've spent a lot of time working together on a collaborative basis on a variety of projects, especially when there's that HR safety crossover.
So what exactly is your role at the Printing United Alliance?
Well, I'm currently the Vice President of Environmental Health and Safety Affairs at the Printing United Alliance. And so my role involves a lot of different activities. And it starts primarily with helping our members understand their environmental health, safety, compliance requirements. It helps. I help with sustainability initiatives, sustainability programs, trying to sort through what that means. And if you've been noticing lately, in the past several years, sustainability has become moved from what I would call a nice thing to do to a must thing to do because of the drive on a legislative and regulatory front, but also from a customer pressure perspective. So now that the government's involved in sustainability, we're seeing more and more requirements emerging. So, from that respect, we've been doing a lot of outreach and education. We do advocacy. I do a lot of advocacy work on behalf of the industry. So if there is such a proposed rule or regulation, and it has an impact on the industry, we step in and represent the industry's interest to the appropriate agency or appropriate legislative body.
What was the big change between before and now? I know you said just like the public opinion and some governmental stuff, but what was it exactly that changed?
I would say public pressure primarily, because the reflection of, back to Civics 101, we get laws that are passed in the states and in the federal government because the public is demanding action be taken on some particular topic. And in this particular instance, environmental issues have risen. They've been slowly becoming it's like an overnight sensation that's been 25 years in the making. So slowly the drumbeat got louder and louder and louder, and then eventually it reaches to crescendo, and then there's a compelling movement on the part of our legislature to act. And they're pressured and lobbied, by various interest groups. And so once that pressure gets to a certain point, then they feel they have to act. I would say probably the thing that really the event that really triggered a lot of the activity recently was in my opinion, I go back to what China did, called the China Sword Program, or their Blue Skies Initiative, where back in 2018, essentially China said, we're no longer being the world's dumping ground for all your garbage. And
rightfully so, I think.
Yeah. And really, I look at my own personal experience in this area, but essentially, I thought I was doing the right thing because I was diligently collecting my recyclable material, putting it in my blue bin. Once a week, a truck would come by, it would scoop them up, and off it went. And I felt good because I'm like, hey, I'm recycling. So what was actually happening behind the scenes is that, all that material was going to what they call a material recovery facility, or MRF. They were literally dumping it on the floor. They were sorting through it and picking out some things that were of a high economic value, something that could be recycled. And they pretty much bailed everything else up and shipped it to China. And then the same thing happened in China as they opened up the bales, they picked through it, pulled out some stuff that they thought was economically viable, and then they landfilled it, or they had to do something with it. And so eventually they're like, we can't do this anymore. And that wasn't just the United States doing that. That was the EU. That was many countries across the world. And so, starting in the 2016, 2017 timeframe, China said, we're not doing this anymore. They started gradually raising their standards, for the contaminants and materials they would accept. And finally, they just said, we're not taking anything else. That's it. We're not taking nothing from the rest of the world. And so it caused, I think, a sharp reflection on the part of everyone else, in the world, to say, well, what are we really doing here? We're just shifting this stuff from our country to another country.
Yeah.
And at that time too, China actually refused. See, China was huge when it came to fiber because, of course, we print on a wide variety of substrates, and fiber was a big source. They took a lot of paper and waste paper. They refused to even take waste paper. So, and that was interesting because it caused some of the Chinese paper companies to buy pulp mills here in North America, and they were shipping pulp back to make paper because China still needs paper. They still need fiber. I mean, they're one of the world's largest economies, and they need those materials in order to produce and ship goods. So, so I think what's interesting is that, and then that triggered a domino effect, because now that you had these municipalities that were collecting and separating this material, and they were conveniently sending it to China, making a little bit of money on it, now they couldn't send it. So what do? They had to landfill. And so costs began to skyrocket. And as a result, you saw municipalities starting to really get concerned about all this waste they were receiving. And that's where we saw the emergence of the concept called extended producer responsibility, EPR. And then EPR has been around for quite some time. It's new to printing and packaging. And then for apparel decoration, again, you have the same situation. The drumbeat is extremely loud right now, where what do you do with all the apparel, textiles, materials? So California actually passed an extended producer responsibility law for apparel and textile. And a couple other states are considering it. And then there's a large movement in the EU to consolidate, because some of the countries have passed EPR legislation dealing with textiles. And
is this just for like waste materials or like
discarded material? Yeah, waste materials, discarded materials, overruns, returns. What do you do with all the clothing that people no longer want, need,
right, or
desire? Socially, of course, we know there's fashion, and people are very. I'm personally not necessarily a big believer in fashion, but there's a lot of people that believe in fashion. They follow the trends and things like that. So, you have clothing and apparel and textiles, and the volumes are just phenomenal in terms of the amount of waste, and then the amount of energy and resources and materials that go into making all the different types of materials that we wear. You have cotton and polyesters and blends and all that stuff, and the dyeing of the fabric and all that. The environmental impact is huge.
Being involved in that, have
Yeah.
you found any good ways that they're finding to take those scraps or take those unused items and turn it into something good?
It's in its infancy, but there are literally almost every day. I'm reading where there is some recycling activities that are going on, or coming up with new breakthroughs on how to break down certain types of polymers that are used in clothing and recycling activities. So yes, there's not a lot right now, but it's coming. There's some recycling that's occurring, and there's new technologies that are coming. There's been some startups, some stops and starts, because again, when you deal with recycled material, it's an issue of economics. So the virgin materials are way less expensive because the whole system is designed to create virgin materials at a lower cost. Now we're going to take the material, we're going to have to separate it, we're going to have to handle it, we're going to have to manage it. We're going to have
just
to
shipping it and getting it to different facilities and all that other. It's a huge pain. Yeah,
so you have it comes at a certain cost disadvantage from a cost competitive perspective. And so, but I think that gets a little equalized, because at least in some of the EPR and similar legislation, they're putting mandates in there that certain packaging has to have X amount of recycled content. We haven't seen that yet for textiles and apparel, but if you look at that as an extension, that may be something that could occur depending upon the type of fabric that you're dealing with, because you have to close the loop. Really what we're talking about is a circular economy, and to have a circular economy, you have to have a closed loop in terms of the manufacturing of the product, the use of the product, and then the ultimate fate of what happens to the product.
There's just so much that goes into all of that stuff that you just kind of get lost at some point of like, well, what do I do and how do I do it? You know what I mean? It would be nice to have a clear vision of any waste material, apparel, or whatever goes into this bin, and then once a week or once a month or something, a truck comes, picks it up, and then it goes to the appropriate facility. Instead of right now, we have a bin of, discarded shirts or overages or whatever it is, and then they just get used as test shirts in every possible location. And then once you print on every spot as a test, it goes into the garbage, essentially.
Yeah, there are ways to repurpose some of that. Some of those materials can get shredded and be used as insulation, like in automobiles. We have a member where they found an outlet for their garments that they could get shredded. Literally, I was just reading, I think yesterday or this morning, they came up with a new technology to take polyester and turn it into insulation for your home. Which I thought was interesting. But now that's just in its infancy. It's not even, you can't find that. But there's people working. In other words, there's people working on ways to repurpose those, because literally it's mountains and mountains and mountains of used garments and textiles and materials. Yes.
See, that stuff makes sense to me though, because it's stuff that's going to be hidden and buried. No one's ever going to see it. So like if you shred a bunch of shirts that had prints on them or weird colors or whatever, like it doesn't matter. It's insulation in a wall, or it's in a car, or it's whatever. That totally makes sense and stops using some other materials where you could use this instead. So
yeah. Well, back to your first question. So
I was going to say we went hard into recycling for a little while.
Yeah, we made a hard left or a hard right into recycling.
Well,
so.
The main reason why I got interested in wanting to talk to you in the first place was that I saw you talk at the Apparelist event, and you were talking about make ready versus setup. And then this whole thing about, if you say one thing or the other, then if something happens, it's going to be a lot bigger deal. And I was like, you know what? There's got to be a million things that this guy knows that's going to save printers from an issue or whatever. But then also to dive back into that is like, I guess my start question is like, what are some of the most, common misconceptions that printers have about OSHA? You know what I mean? If someone's never had an OSHA issue or whatever, it's just kind of like in the wind of like, well, what is actually an issue in my shop? When I think of OSHA, it's always the jokes of, like someone on standing on a ladder on top of a ladder, or someone in the shop with no shoes on, or it's, someone's always doing something stupid and you're like, oh, let's let OSHA know about this or something. It's like,
yeah, well, OSHA tends to be the boogeyman, so to speak.
right.
And yeah, I think probably first of all, the biggest misconception I think about OSHA that people have is that OSHA will not inspect them. Because their experience has been that OSHA's never shown up, but OSHA's kind of somewhere out there looking over my shoulder. So, but OSHA can and does conduct inspections. And I would say probably the other biggest misconception that people have on a specific issue is on machine guarding. And so with machine guarding, for example, and I think I mentioned this in my presentation, with machine guarding is that just because you have an older piece of equipment, and we have, depending upon your shop and your size, you have different vintages of equipment. So older, sometimes equipment in printing, it was built to last, and it was built pre-OSHA. And so there's a misconception that people have that OSHA has a grandfathering clause for machine guarding. If it never came with a guard, therefore I don't have to put it on because it never came with that. That is, I think, the biggest. Yeah.
It's the same thinking as like when we were kids and your mom would just put her arm across to you for a seatbelt in a car at an intersection. It's like, just because mom has an arm doesn't mean that it's going to stop you from going through the windshield.
Right. Well, yeah, and I grew up in that era. I remember many times my mom throwing her arm across us. We were in the front seat of the car, and she had to stop suddenly. But there's no way your mom's that strong that she can hold you back,
Yeah.
But it was just instinct on her part to help protect you. But to me, that one I answer that pretty regularly for folks because they want it. I think it's because they want it to be true. They believe it to be true, and therefore they think it's true, but it's not. So OSHA, and the way that the OSHA regulations are set up here, at least in the United States, is that it's the responsibility of the end user or the owner of the equipment, and not the equipment manufacturer. Because that's immediately you get, well, shouldn't the equipment manufacturer be responsible? And the answer is absolutely yes. However, the way that the regulations are set up is that you're responsible as the end user. The manufacturer doesn't have that responsibility. But where the manufacturer is vulnerable, at least here in the United States, is they're liable. In other words, the way that the system is set up is if you have an injury on a piece of equipment, an employee is injured, the employer is typically indemnified through workman's comp. Every employer has to pay workman's comp premiums typically to their state or to an insurance company. There's a program out there. And what you get for that as an employer is that you are indemnified. In other words, if your employee's hurt, the workman's comp kicks in, they pay the insurance bills, they pay the rehab. If they're hurt seriously enough, they go on disability, and the employee cannot sue the employer generally, unless they can prove direct negligence or criminal intent or something like that. Usually you're indemnified as an employer, but the equipment manufacturer isn't. And so what happens if they get injured on a piece of equipment, their lawyers typically sue the equipment manufacturer for that. And so that's where the equipment manufacturer has, because people say, well, if that's not the case, why does the equipment manufacturer care? Well, because they're subject to liability for putting an unsafe piece of equipment, into the marketplace, and someone got injured.
Yeah. But I could see how it's got to be the end user as well, though, too, because every shop has different configurations. They have things in different spots. And it's kind of like, all right, well, if you have a lane to walk through here to get to the press, is it what it should be? You know what I mean? The manufacturer has no way of knowing that you cram this in the corner and someone's got to walk through or dive underneath a pallet or something to get around the press. And it's like, that's dumb.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. It doesn't mean to say that and that's where there is a role for the shop, to set up safe work and to make sure you have a safe work environment, B, set up safe work procedures, and then C, make sure everyone follows the safe work procedures. So if you have, for example, a manufacturer supplies the equipment and say it's guarded. But there's a perception that that guarding interferes in production, and then the shop person, removes the guarding. Well, at that point, there's some vulnerability there because, again, they've altered the safety system of a piece of equipment. And if it's deemed to be negligent and you're in one of those states, you could get sued as the employer because you altered a piece of equipment, removed a safety system, a safety guard, or, heaven forbid, you instructed someone to do something unsafe with respect to working with the equipment. That's where it gets a little dicey from that legal liability perspective.
What do you think are some of the, maybe just like the top 2 or 3 things that people should definitely have on, say, like an automatic screen printing press that they tend to not have, be it an old press, new press, whatever? I know you said they removed the safety bars, which I'm guilty of as well, but is there anything else that you see often where it's like, guys, like, stop doing this?
Oh, absolutely. And this is where the folks with automatic screen presses have really gotten the attention of OSHA. And I think I mentioned in my presentation, there's been, my experience has been, there's been a rash of these inspections occurring, typically because they're triggered by an injury. So under OSHA's regulations, if you have an injury that involves an amputation, involves an injury that requires hospitalization for treatment. Now, someone could get injured, go to the emergency room and, get patched up and sent back. That's not going to trigger reporting. Or if there's a loss of an eye, then that has to be reported to OSHA within 24 hours. Generally, if it's involved in printing, because we're considered, unfortunately, a high hazard industry for amputations, that triggers an inspection typically by OSHA.
Who has to notify OSHA? Is it us as the employer, or is it like the hospital? Or
no, the employer. The employer. You have 24 hours from when you find out that that injury happened or that amputation occurred. In some cases, I know it gets a little gross, but in some cases, there's different terminology for when you have body parts ripped off you. If it's an avulsion, for example, an avulsion isn't an amputation. It's not reportable. But an amputation where you have the loss of a partial or piece of a finger or whatever, that becomes a reportable.
What did you call it? An avulsion?
An avulsion, yeah. For example, if you are in a situation you rip your ear off, that's not an amputation. That's an avulsion. I actually had to look them up. When OSHA came out with this rule, I'm like, what is that? So I actually had to look that up. Is
it just certain body parts, or certain amount of it being actually cut off counts as one thing? And
no, it's really, I think I would probably say the removal process, and whether or not if you lose like a digit, it doesn't even have to involve bone. It could just be soft tissue. So ultimately, the arbiter of that's going to be the emergency room or the doctor when they make that diagnosis, and they'll call it either an amputation or an avulsion.
Just slip the surgeon like a 10 and be like, you're just going to write this up as an avulsion, right?
Right. Well, you can. In fact, in some cases, if they haven't written it up, there's a way that you can work with the treating physician to make sure it gets written up properly. Like, for example, and I know this is gross, but deglovings are common. And deglovings, like on laminators, deglovings are and on certain types of printing presses, they can occur. And so you're literally ripping the skin off of a hand or fingers, and that's going to be not an amputation. That's going to be more of an avulsion. So now it's still serious. It's still a terrible injury, but it depends on how it gets identified, and then whether or not you have to report that. But typically, when you have an incident like that occurring, you have to report that to OSHA, and as it typically they'll respond, and they usually send an inspector.
What happens if you don't report it to OSHA and you're supposed to?
Well, if they are there for some other reason, typically one of the things that they immediately do when they do an inspection is they look at your injury and illness record. So if you have 10 or more full-time employees, you have to fill out what's called OSHA Form 300. And the 300 form is a log of injuries and illnesses that you keep track of. And so they'll look at that log and they'll say, hey, explain to me what happened here. What was this injury? And then they may look at the records that are associated with it, and they'll start asking questions. If they find out that you should have reported it and you didn't report it, then they'll fine you about $16,000. That's the current penalty. They're instructed to somewhere between 12 to 16,000 is what you would pay.
Dang. Not that I'm trying to avoid any OSHA anything, but like generally you said that they're triggered to do an inspection most commonly with some kind of injury. Is there any other, like if I was just minding my business, no injuries, no nothing, and I'm just running my shop and everything's good, what's the likelihood that just like an OSHA inspector is going to show up on a random day and be like, hey, I'm here, let's look it over?
Well, there's a fairly high chance at times because, again, we're considered, unfortunately, a high hazard industry for amputations. And so OSHA generates inspection lists based off those, they call them NAICS codes. Our industry has a certain NAICS code. So all industries get assigned NAICS codes, North American Standard Industrial Classification codes. And so they use those NAICS codes and they develop lists of companies. They also have another program that I'm just literally writing an article about called the Site Specific Targeting Program. And they look at your injury and illness rate. And if your injury and illness rate is greater than twice the national average, or you have an increase in your injury and illness rate, you get put on a list for inspection. And you say, well, how would they know what that is? Because every March 2nd, if you have more than 20 employees, you have to fill out, that's called the ITA form. Basically, you have to go online and give them your Form 300A. So there's Form 300, there's Form 300A. So Form 300A is a summary of everything that's on Form 300. That's to be posted in the workplace. And then you have to go online and report that Form 300A information. You have more than 20 employees. And so if you have more than 20 and you don't fill out the form, that can put you on the list. And they'll want to know why you didn't fill out the form each March 2nd. So,
how are you supposed to see? That was something we talked a lot with the HR stuff, is there's a lot of things that like people just don't know. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know until I didn't know these forms existed until you just said something about it. Like, how is an average shop who starts a business, files for a DBA, runs a shop, does what they're doing? At what point are they told, hey, you're supposed to do this, you're supposed to do this? Is this something that like OSHA or a department like that sends you out a thing and it's like, hey, when you get to this point, you have to do this. When you get to this point, you have to do this. Or is it just you find out the hard way?
Unfortunately, OSHA is not very good at communicating what's required. They will tell you that they do a good job of communicating what's required, but they don't. In my opinion, they do a horrible job of that. That's kind of the role that we play, at the association, because we send out reminders every year to the members. We post on our webpage, and we put that information out through our newsletter saying, hey, it's, April 1st or February 1st, you better make sure you get your Form 300A up. If coming up in March, for March 2nd, make sure that you're reporting your injury and illnesses. So we do that as part of our service. We include that as part of our, presentations to our members. And, we try to answer a lot of questions. So we try to fill that gap. But again, we're not talking to everybody. That's very challenging to be able to talk to everybody. But I would say they do a horrible job. And there has to be a better, in my opinion, there has to be a better way to communicate. Like I think it's a simple thing. Everyone pretty much knows if they're going to start a business, they have to go get a business license from their state. Well, a lot of times they think, hey, I got my permit. But I think there should be a packet that's given out to every company that starts and say, hey, here's some information you should be aware of, or
It should
something
just be
simple.
it should just be like a yearly checklist or something, or like a size of your shop or a revenue or whatever it is, employee size. It's like there should be a checklist of like, all right, you've reached X milestone. Like here's the things you need now,
Right.
or whatever. It should just be this ongoing scroll that you have that's like, okay, these are my, responsibilities at this point.
Yeah, I think that there could be a lot more done to support small business by our government. I'm a firm believer in education, and there, to me, it's just a simple packet like that. I mean, IRS rules change all the time too, but typically, there's software that you can buy if you're small enough and you do your own, or you have an accountant or bookkeeper that should be tracking all that and staying aware of that for you and your business. But, and there are consultants that are out there for OSHA and EPA, those types of things. But when you're a small shop, you can't really afford that. I think there has to be a lot more information flowing from the government to the business owners. If they're going to impose all these requirements, they need to do a better job of communicating. OSHA says, yeah, we have a newsletter and we have information that we put out. We have a web page that everybody can go on, but A, it's a time crunch issue, and B, where do you look? Unless you know where to specifically look for something on OSHA's website, it's very intimidating.
How often should a shop do some kind of like formal safety check that doesn't necessarily have to do with OSHA, but protects them from the things that OSHA would come in and cite?
Well, I think depending upon the size of the shop, and the minimum is annually. However, and there's some annual training requirements that OSHA has too, that companies need to be following up on. But depending upon if you're a larger shop, you're probably maybe looking at a 6-month interval, because the issue is that here's a great example. Under the hazard communication standard, which is the chemical safety requirement. So when you bring any chemical into your workplace, you have to provide training to your employees on the safety of the chemical, how to properly handle it, what are the hazards, how do you protect yourself from the hazards, things like that. And then you have to have a label, because a lot of times the shipping container has the proper labeling, or in all cases it does, but you will transfer to us what we call a secondary container, like a squirt bottle. So, squirt bottles are pretty handy, but that squirt bottle has to have labeled information on it. It has to have at least the name of the chemical and some identity of the hazards to push back to the other information you have. And so a lot of times those squirt bottles are solvents, and they do a great job of removing, ink from the press and spots from shirts and things like that. But it also does a great job of taking the label off. So you'll see a lot of like containers in a shop that are not very well labeled, but everybody kind of knows what's in them. But OSHA requires a label on that. And so if you're not keeping up on that, typically that's when OSHA walks through the door and says, oh, what's in that container? And like, oh, that's XYZ chemical. Or like, where's the label on it? And then they're writing you up, for, like a $3,000 to $5,000 fine because you didn't have a label on it. So,
and it's funny too, because I've been to a ton of shops, and mine included, where there's certain chemical that we put into a spray bottle and they just name it something stupid. Like they might be like, oh, this one's called Black Death, and it's got like a skull with crossbones on it or something. And that's all it says. And we know what it is, but then someone like OSHA is going to come in and be like, what the hell is this bottle called Black Death or something? And it's like, oh, that's just our ink remover or something. And it's like, okay,
so
idiots.
Then, OSHA will be writing you a ticket for non-compliance for that. So you can still call it Black Death, but you still got to put, OSHA
proper label on the backside.
You got to have a label, and you got to have, and like to solve that problem. And again, I'm very frustrated with OSHA, but color coding works very well. So using a color coding system to say, the blue bottle has, the Black Death, and the green bottle has this, and the clear bottle has this. And then you can put a chart up in the workplace, and you can have that information on there. But
does that count? Like if it was just a blue bottle, like nothing on it, but everyone knew the blue bottle was ink remover, but on the wall was a poster that said the blue bottles are this, that counts.
Yeah, that would count. That would go a long way. And this is where my frustration lies with OSHA, because they said you at least have to have the product identifier So you have to have something on there, but you could have like A, or you could put 1 on the bottle, and 1 is up on the chart, corresponds to all the name of the chemical and the hazard.
That's smart.
You
Yeah,
can
that's
do-
way more convenient.
Yeah, you can do that. We had asked OSHA just to go with straight color coding. And we could spend hours talking about my frustration with them, because one of the things they said was, what about people that are colorblind? And I'm like, well, you know what? Color is learned. Color you're not born with knowing what color looks like what color. Like somebody taught you green is green and blue is blue, you know? So what we did is to solve that problem in our mock-up of our chart, we put the name of the color with the actual color itself. Because when people are colorblind, and it usually affects males more than females, everyone I've interviewed that has color blindness, because I actually talk to folks that were colorblind, is they see different shades of like gray. They can distinguish, but they don't know that blue is blue and red is red.
Right, but they've known that since birth. Like you're saying, it's like that's to them, that's just what it is. They wouldn't know any different.
Right. And so what you do is then you put that color red, so they see the word red and they can read the red, and they know that's what red should look like.
That shade of gray is what it is that
red.
they're looking for.
So that's how we solved that objection from OSHA. We didn't get what we wanted completely. We just wanted to do some color coding.
Do you guys happen to have a template of a chart like that, or is that something every shop just makes up as they go along?
No, I mean, I have one. I have the whole submission that we sent to OSHA. If someone wants to see an example of a chart, I'd be more than happy to send it.
I just think that's a fantastic idea of like having over by the presses or something, have a laminated chart on the wall or something. And,
everywhere in the shop where you're using the chemicals, you want to post a poster. You need to make sure everyone's trained, and you can show that, hey, we trained everyone. Ideally, they signed off. That's another thing about OSHA. Another yes about misperception. And maybe this is more of a statement and it's not a misperception, but I always stress 100%, if you don't document it, it didn't happen. Even though you can say it did happen, you have to be able to prove that it happened. So if you did training, you did show people, the color chart, and you went through HAZCOM, you've got to document that. If you have procedures, policies you want people to follow, you have to have them sign off on it, because if you don't document it, as far as OSHA is concerned, it didn't exist. And it becomes a challenge to overcome that. So documentation is key.
What are some of the most frequent OSHA violations that shops have?
Well, we were talking about machine guarding, and then the one I think I know I definitely talked about this at my presentation is lockout tagout. So lockout tagout and machine guarding are the two standards that work together to protect employees from injury from working with pretty much equipment. And I know we keep going off on tangents. We did skip over. Let me circle back on equipment, because you had asked about important things for equipment. So the thing that they wouldn't already have. Most importantly, you need a cover for foot pedals. Any foot pedal, any equipment that's driven by a foot pedal, you need to have a guard or cover over the foot pedal. That prevents someone from inadvertently stepping on that foot pedal and actuating equipment. One of the first citations that in this rash of citations we had on automatic screen presses is we had an operator who was loading a shirt onto the pallet. She inadvertently stepped on the foot pedal. It actuated the press, the pallet indexed. It grabbed her and dragged her into the next unit. And she got injured, and they had to take her to the hospital for treatment.
She had an avulsion.
Yeah, no, she didn't have an avulsion, but she I believe she ended up with a broken bone and some pretty bad bruising. And so that triggered, they had to call OSHA. OSHA came out and then nailed them on the foot pedal, and then no guarding. The other thing on automatic screen presses is that at the load and unload stations, you have to have some type of guarding to prevent people from stepping between the units at the load and unload station. And I know you're going to immediately say, well, nobody's going to do that. People don't do that. But we've lost a lot of citations on this where OSHA said there's nothing to prevent someone from inadvertently stepping between the units. And then the other area is around the perimeter of the press. You need to have some type of guard or rail system that a safety cable and a safety bar are not sufficient to prevent someone from ducking between the units. So depending upon the configuration of your press, some of them are so narrow you can't get in there. But some of them are pretty broad and you can actually step between the units. And there are
So you're saying if you have a press that is mid-sized and doesn't have, it's just pallet arm and then pallet and whatever, you
Right.
should have a bar that goes all the way around?
A fence, basically a fence that goes around the perimeter.
So that they can't just walk between the two is,
Correct.
I guess, the goal.
Yeah.
Okay.
Some type of fencing around the perimeter, and you also need a type of fencing guard at the load and unload station.
Right. Well, I guess that ties back into the question that I had just asked is like, what other violations are common that people can look out for?
Yeah, machine guarding and then lockout tagout. Now, lockout tagout, basically, that's the standard that protects employees during, and you heard me use the word make ready. So during the tasks that can be such as changing screens, putting ink, making adjustments, that's all we would consider that to be make ready. If you use the word setup, that's why I was saying change your vocabulary, because using the word setup will immediately trigger lockout tagout because it's actually in the standard itself. So it says setup activities are subject to lockout tagout. Essentially what lockout tagout requires you to do is to turn all the power off the equipment, de-energize it, isolate the energy sources. That's a fancy way of saying I basically have to put a lock on the on button for all the energy sources. And then I can do whatever I need to do, but I can't have any power. I have to be completely zero energy.
Which, from what I understand, is, it's insane to me if someone had to do that. Like it's like if I went to the breaker box, had to shut the power off to the press, put a lock on it so it stayed in the off position, and had no power, none of this to the press, and then I could go in and change out a screen.
Yep.
And then go back, take the lock off, flip the switch, which is why we have it, I guess, in this industry, is to where we can just break the yellow cable or hit the E button or whatever, and then be able to do those tasks. But you're saying that there's language in the way that this goes that we shouldn't be ever say setup. We should be saying make ready.
Yes, because when this standard came out in the late 80s, we went to OSHA and said, as an industry, we're out of business. We can't follow your standard. And then we started having conversations with them because there is an exception to the standard. And I say we make our living in the exception. And the exception is for what's called minor servicing and maintenance. That's the terminology, minor servicing and maintenance. So for minor servicing and maintenance activities, you can perform them on equipment while it's energized. So in other words, we can have power to the equipment, but we have to have a form of alternative protection to protect the employee in the event of the term they use is re-energization, or I use the term startup. So the question is, if someone's in there changing a screen or adding ink, what prevents that machine from indexing? What prevents that piece of equipment from starting up and moving and injuring that person? And so then that entailed a rather detailed discussion with OSHA about alternative methods for protection. OSHA says you can do minor servicing and maintenance if it's routine, repetitive, and integral. Those are the key words: routine, repetitive, and integral. So it can't be, I'm going to overhaul this piece of equipment, I'm going to change a motor, right? That's definitely
right.
Out. So it's routine, repetitive, and integral to the production process. So we spent a lot of time explaining make ready, which is a term that we use at least more in the commercial side. My career started in commercial printing, and now I've gravitated over to Printing United, which we have all the different verticals, and we have apparel decoration and commercial packaging. So make ready was a term that we introduced to OSHA, and we have a letter. We actually have two letters, one from 1992, one from 2004. That we use in these situations, and we've been able to successfully get citations rescinded and allow printers to do these make-ready activities while there's power. In fact, in some cases, you have to have power in order to do some of the make-ready activities on presses. And so, that's where the term make-ready comes in, because OSHA recognizes that make-ready procedures used in printing with alternative procedures are acceptable, and you don't have to turn the power off.
So correct me if I'm wrong. the reasoning why people should, instead of saying set up, say make ready, is so if there was a violation or somebody got hurt and OSHA comes in and that employee says, well, I was setting up the press.
Right.
Instantly OSHA's gonna be like, oh, he said set up, and that's part of this umbrella now, and it's way higher of a fine or way higher of an issue.
Yeah, and why?
Whereas they use the terminology, well, I was getting the press make ready, then they're like, okay, you're under this umbrella of like shit happens and it's not as big of a deal kind of thing.
Well, OSHA's not that smart that they would know it would fall under either umbrella. If you were set up, they'll say yes. It's automatically. The next question is, why wasn't the press locked out? Why wasn't it zero energy? And you're going to say, well, because we were doing make ready. And then that's typically when I get involved and I explain to them that make ready is recognized by OSHA. Here's the 2-letter of interpretations. And then we start a conversation with OSHA regarding the application or lack of application of lockout. And then most important.
So you're trying to advocate and fight for them, even if they say set up, that like, hey guys, like set up to them is make ready.
Correct.
They're just using different terminology.
Yeah, and we try to explain to them that the word setup in the world of printing is actually make ready, because we have to, from a defense strategy, we have to push OSHA's attention back to that 92 letter that says make ready is falls under minor servicing and maintenance. So,
right, but you're asking, as in our industry, basically like, hey guys, you're going to save me and a lot of people like me a lot of headache and a lot of time and issue if you just start saying make ready instead of set up. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay.
But then the alternative procedure, and this is critical, and I recommend this to everyone, is to have a written document where you go through with each operator as to how you want them to perform the make ready. So just because it's make ready and OSHA doesn't require us all to turn all the power off. We, as you indicated, we have to do something. Like if it's the safety cable, you have to break the safety cable before you think about stepping in, or you hit an e-stop if there's an e-stop available. But sometimes an e-stop takes all the power down, or you actuate a safety bar. Sometimes there's safety bars, and you trigger the safety bar. But you have to have something written specifically in a procedure that the employers are going to follow when they're doing the make ready activities, to document that you've thought about this, you've identified an alternative procedure, and then they follow that, and our employees follow that procedure when they're stepping between the units, or putting themselves in an area where they could get struck by a platen if it actuated.
And I mean, I guess to try to speak for all the other printers that are similar to me and whatever, is like, that to us that's what doing our part as owners and managers is. The first thing you teach is like, make sure you cut the safety wire or you hit e-stop or something before you even remotely think about getting into the press or, getting under or doing whatever. Like, just do those things. Like, it's not worth you thinking, oh, I have 3 seconds to like dive in and grab this thing and dive back out. Because we had a guy on a couple episodes ago that he thought that, I could get under there real quick. And then basically he got impaled and like almost died. And it's like, dude, all you had to do is cut the wire or hit e-stop, and that wouldn't even have been a thing.
Well, and people get between the units, and that's what triggers these OSHA inspections. I don't understand. Again, I don't operated a piece of equipment like that, so I don't understand why people would do that. But the statement I always like to make is that if you play chicken with a machine, it's not if, it's when, right? So it's going to happen. And typically what I find, at least in the printing industry, and we do have amputations, we have fatalities. Unfortunately, fatalities do happen in printing. There's a fatality, a video I have on a screen press, unfortunately. So what I typically find and what I typically say is that's usually not the first time somebody's done that activity. In other words, it's not the first time they've stepped between a unit. It's not the first time that they put themselves in a position. It's just the first time that the machine, didn't know they were doing that. It just was doing its job.
Well, let's, I guess, try a scared straight thing real quick of like, I mean, you get these cases and you know what they are. Like, what are the most common injuries in a print shop? Like, what is stuff that people can be like, oh, well, this keeps happening. Like, maybe we shouldn't do this.
Well, the more common injuries are usually cuts and lacerations, because we're somewhere between mechanical and physical. There's still a lot of physical requirements in printing operations. So cuts and lacerations are generally our number one.
What are people getting cut on?
They're cutting themselves with razor knives. They're getting cut on edges of pallets. They're getting cut on boxes. They're getting cut on materials. They're getting cut on sharp edges that are there. So that's usually, I got story after story where somebody's like, "Oh, I was using a razor knife and wham, they just opened up their arm." So they can be pretty serious, but so cuts and lacerations are typically number one. The more severe injuries, like I said, are the amputations. And as I mentioned in my presentation, the industry averages between like 40 and 60, sometimes as high as 80 amputations a year. And I tell people, I said to the audience, I said, let's stop a second and think about that.
Is that just in the U.S.?
Yes. Let that number sink in. There are going to be about the size of the people, and we had probably a little over 100 people or so. About the number of people by the end of the year will have experienced an amputation.
We'll have one less arm.
Absolutely. Yeah.
That's insane to me.
It tends to be more fingers than anything else, but and then, we may see one or two fatalities. It used to be we had one or two, but the statistics that the last couple of years was we had 8 fatalities. Now,
not that I want to get super deep into that, but like, what are the fatalities? Is it people ducking under a press and
generally it's a lockout? Believe it or not, it goes back to lockout tagout. It's usually a situation where someone's doing an activity on the equipment and it should be locked out. But just because we have the exception in doing make ready doesn't mean you can do everything on a piece of equipment. And so typically what happens is that someone's doing something on a piece of equipment and they don't see their coworker. And so they start the equipment up and somebody's inside it. And that's basically how a lot of fatalities happen and amputations happen, is that they don't know that a coworker or a maintenance person is doing something and they're like, "Oh, this equipment should always be running." And they just turn it on and that person's inside there. And so it's a failure. It's a systemic failure on the part of the company because A, the person should have been trained. B, the equipment should have been locked out. I mean, if there's a lock on it, nobody can turn it on until you take your lock off. It's one lock. I call it one lock, one person, one life. You're actually protecting your own life when you lock out a piece of equipment.
I wonder if there's something not necessarily locking out, but like say there's a red card or there's a magnetic flap. A lot of screen printing presses have like a digital display.
Yeah.
Is there like a magnetic flap with like a red piece of rubber or something where if you're going to run around the press, you flop it down over the display so that the person standing there knows like, "Oh shit, I can't turn this on because."
Well, you're thinking the same way I am. What I recommend though is a plexiglass cover where then you would put a lock on it. In other words, you could put a cover over the control station.
And again, I'm just trying to think of things that people would actually use. Like if there was like a whole thing you had to lock and shut, like the person honestly in a shop, they're going to be like, "Oh, I just got to go add ink to head 8." And they just want to do it quick. So I'm saying it's something where they could just literally reach up and flop it down and then run around to the press and then come back to where what mostly is going to happen is someone else on the press is going to be like farting around on their phone, checking their Instagram or something. And then they're going to look up and be like, "Oh," like they're not even going to realize that Susan next to them ran to head 8 to put ink in. Right. And then they're just going to index and then they're going to cut her in half. And it's like, if she just would have flopped over the red card over the display or something, he would know like, "Oh yeah, she's over there."
Yeah. The better solution is that whenever they're going to add ink to head 8, they break that safety cable or they actuate the safety bar, because at that point they're in control. That person who's stepping in there and is vulnerable is in control of the machine motion because they're actually breaking the safety cable or actuating the safety bar.
I mean, I agree with that. I'm just saying as a printer and as an owner and knowing employees, a lot of times what happens and why people get hurt is they think they're the exception to the rule, where it's like, oh, I just reach over the safety cable with my ink cup and like put it in.
Right.
Like they'll just skip, like it's such a stupid little step, but they'll skip it because they're like, oh, it's fine. I can do it real quick. It's always that real quick thing in their brain of like, oh, I don't even need to bother with this thing. And it's like, that's where I'm like, all right, well, yeah, obviously they should break the cable, but it should just be in their brain of like, I need to do this thing at the front of the press before I even get over there to stop this from happening.
Absolutely. Anything that would add and enhance safety, because from my perspective, safety and production are not mutually exclusive. They're mutually inclusive. In other words, it doesn't take that much more time to break that safety cable, or like you said, to maybe put a cover in place on the control panel. Because think of the ramifications afterwards, and you go, what would it take? 2 seconds to do something like that?
I mean, I think of like my dad and like doing like being a contractor or whatever, and the amount of things we've done and built together where he's just like, oh, I'm just going to get on the roof real quick and I just got to screw this thing down or whatever. And it's like, he's not going, knowing my dad, he's not going to take the time to like put on like a harness and like clip himself in. So if he falls off the roof, like whatever, he's literally fallen off of roofs before. And it's just like, you're an idiot. Like just do the thing. But he sees it as, I just got to run up the ladder real quick and screw this thing in real quick and come right back down. It's like, well, it's always the real quick when you fall off the fucking roof. Like, like just take 2 seconds and do what you're supposed to do. And that's what I mean is it's the same in the shop. Like we're all fast paced. We're trying to get the job done. We're trying to do whatever. And it's always real quick. I'll just throw ink in, or real quick. I got to change this out or whatever. And then that's when people get
because unfortunately, production trumps safety. And that should not be the case from my perspective, because I always get involved usually after the fact. Usually there's been a pretty serious injury, and so I see what the net result can be. And then you say, well, if we could get people to think more about prevention and incorporate these procedures, activities, change their culture, their behavior to be preventative, then you're going to be much better off than trying to deal with the ramifications after something like that happens. Mm-hmm. And like you said, it's real quick. People reach into, I'm going to clear this jam. I can just reach in here real quick. And they literally had lockout tagout training the day before. So I was doing the accident investigation, and the woman ran her hand into a piece of equipment and crushed her hand. And she knew better, right? She knew she should have hit the stop button. She didn't hit the stop button to pull because she just thought, oh, I can do it real quick. And I'll guarantee you, as I said, when things like that happen, like use your dad for an example, that's not the first time he scrambled up on a roof to screw something down real quick without putting his safety on.
Oh, well, that's the thing is he probably got away with it 35 more times before that, but it's the 36th time where he falls off the roof and Humpty Dumpty's
himself. That's my point, is that usually when someone experiences a pretty serious injury, that's not the first time that they've done that activity, and they've been able to avoid an injury, and then this time they end up getting the injury because of whatever reason. Maybe it was in the fall and it was a little icy up there, but he didn't see it was icy, and he scrambled up there and then slipped and fell off the roof because there was a coating of ice up there or something, because he was just thinking he just wanted to do what he wanted to do real quick. I just want to do this activity, not even thinking about
famous last words is real quick. Like I'm just going to get up there. So we talked about chemicals, like the spray bottles. We talked about people cutting themselves with the knives. Was there any kind of safety or any recommended like box cutter or something that stops a lot of these lacerations?
Yeah, there are self-retracting box cutters. There are safety knives that again, they're more expensive, but there are retracting safety knives that and of course PPE. Sometimes, you got to wear the cut resistant gloves when you're cutting stuff up. So having PPE and
we bought some of those box cutters for shipping and receiving, where it's not just like a slide knife box cutter. It's the kind that's got like the plastic hook. So like the blade is actually fully covered. Like you can't cut yourself with it. You just run it along the tape lines on the box. Stuff like that comes to mind for me, but there is always like the cheap U-line, slide up box cutter. It's basically a metal holder with a razor blade in it.
Well, the worst thing,
a lot of people,
our worst habits when it comes to razor blades, you see just a lot of people using straight razor blades. with no holder, no.
Just grabbing a razor blade and going to town.
I was walking through one of our members' screen printing shop, and they were laminating. And there was a guy literally on the end of the laminator pulling the laminate, whatever product they were laminating off. And he was literally using a straight edge razor cutting it. And so the owner of the company said, Gary, what do you see wrong with that? Is there some way we can improve that? I'm like, well, yeah, I see two things immediately. One, I would give this guy cut resistant gloves, number one. Number two, give him a handle, give him a razor blade with a handle so he has better control.
Like, why is the only option that he has just a blade?
Yeah, he's just using a blade because people didn't think about that, I guess, or whatever. And that's another thing too, is like, you should examine, and I say this to everyone, you need to examine critically what you do in your shop in other ways.
Or think about worst case scenarios at least.
Yeah. You can think about, and think about that, what's the outcome that could come from that? And can we do it better? Can we do it in a safer manner that we wouldn't have that from that situation from actually occurring? So, but it's like the simple things, yes, we have equipment, we have lockout, tagout. Those are the big things. Those are the ones that cause amputations and can kill people. But you have all the other little things that add up. Ergonomics is another one. So I just got an email from a member who's they have some ergonomic problems with some of the newer, I think it's the DTF technology. And so we're looking into how we can maybe help them adjust what the employees are doing and reach out to some other folks to see, because they're saying the employees are starting to complain of soreness. So it's an ergonomics issue. So we have ergonomics.
How are they getting sore doing DTF printing?
That's the question. I asked a series of questions. So that was, I'm waiting for the answer to come back. I assume it's loading and unloading, doing it repetitively, because some of that equipment's pretty fast now. So you have to keep up on it. To load the shirt, take the shirt off, to clamp it down on at least the one technology I was looking at. So
it seems like something that's newer or something that you're looking into with that. But is there standardized, I guess, heights of certain things? That's what I'm thinking of when it comes to loading and unloading and a heat press and whatever, is people sometimes just leave them at the heights they're at. And then every day someone's bending down to do something. Is it make sure it's at least, elbow at 90-degree angle for that operator is the proper height of this piece of equipment? And can that be a violation in some sort of, or is that more just hey, don't be a bonehead and help your employee not hurt themselves?
Yeah. See, that gets back to the records. So if you're recording a lot of, let me step back. There's no OSHA standard on ergonomics that was defeated back when Clinton was leaving the presidency. They passed and our ergonomics regulation was rolled back by Congress when Bush got elected. So it goes back a while. So there's no ergonomics regulation. Nevertheless, OSHA can still cite you under what they call the general duty clause. So if they come in and check your injury, your Form 300, and they see a whole bunch of soft tissue ergonomic related injuries that are getting reported, then they'll say, what are you doing about it? And you better have an answer, because otherwise they'll probably cite you for that. So there is a way that ergonomics does get into enforcement. But to answer your question, the standard height, you want the terminology that's used in ergonomics is to have things in a neutral position. Like you said, 90 degrees. You want to be sitting upright, ideally, or having an upright position. The problem is that job doesn't typically require sitting. So you have to have adjustable workstations because everyone's height's different.
I was going to say the problem with a lot of that is you might have 4 different operators that use that same piece of equipment, and one dude's 6'2", and the other girl's 5'4".
Yeah.
And it's are you taking this thing on and off blocks for this person? Or an automatic press isn't easy to change height wise. But
or you give the short person, you build them a set of steps, and a platform that they can, when they're working with it, they have a platform that they can stand on. That's perfectly acceptable, because now you're adjusting the person kind of to the work, or you're actually adjusting the workstation to the work that's required. But you actually have to look at it critically. As I said, people don't look critically at their operation.
Well, quick follow-up to that, though, is it not a violation of some sort to have kind of a trip hazard next to an auto press? So, if I got, say, Ashley, who's shorter in our shop. Like, not saying anything bad about Ashley. She just is actually really short. Like, if I got her like almost like a booster thing to stand on, does that now become a hazard because someone can trip over that and fall into the press? Or is that something where she can use it while she's standing there, but when she's done, she has to move it out of the way?
Yes. Yeah. In other words, yeah, you'd make it portable, so you moved it out of the way. Absolutely.
Right. Okay. Is there anything else? Because like, I mean, there's a bunch of things that come to mind with me. And one thing that I'm like super critical about in my shop is making sure everything is off, unplugged before I leave. Because I know, like, I have friends who have had screen printing shops where their shop's beautiful, everything's awesome, and they get totally taken out by an extension cord. Like, oh, an extension cord they got left plugged in overnight, caught fire or something, and their whole shop burns to the ground. Their life changes because they left an extension cord plugged in. So, like, I have a rule here where we go around and any kind of cable like that that's plugged in of something, we unplug it. Like, not like critical equipment, but like stuff that's like, oh, you had a fan with a extension cord or something. It's like, all right, that's unplugged. Or we go through, especially where I live, this might not be for everybody, but where I live, there's a ton of brownouts and like power stuff with storms or whatever. We have green stickers on all the breaker boxes of the critical equipment that could get fried in a brownout. So every day before the production manager leaves, he shuts all those breakers off so that overnight when nobody's here, we don't have any issues with that kind of thing. Like, is that a big deal with the OSHA stuff, or just safety in general?
Absolutely. You mentioned one of my favorite topics, which are extension cords. So you should not be using an extension cord to power anything in your operation, period. Extension cords are only allowed for temporary use, not clearly defined in the regulations, but temporary use, they're allowed. But if you are permanently running equipment off extension cords, that's a big no-no. That's a trip hazard and, as you mentioned, a fire hazard. And then in conjunction with that are the power strips. So power strips are okay for low draw equipment like computers and say maybe desktop printers, things like that. And but when you have power strips and you're running production equipment off of, and you have an extension cord that's plugged into that, or you daisy chain a power strip off a power strip, that's like a trifecta. I always call that the trifecta of no-nos.
Again, this is me being like, paranoid about this kind of thing, but it's like, I always am super creeped out by power strips because it's one of those things where there's so many like shitty knockoff ones, or you can buy them at the dollar store or whatever. Yep. And it's like, dude, you are plugging that into the wall.
Exactly.
And then plugging 8 items into one thing. Like, that sketches me out. So like, I could see if you bought like a GE one and you're like, oh, why did I spend $60 on this power strip? It's like, probably because it's rated for everything you're going to plug into it. Not some like two pack at the Dollar General you bought for $6, and then you bring it here and you plug in a heat press into it and this thing and that thing, and it's like, dude, knock it off. Like, get the proper.
When you overdraw those, that you create an extreme fire hazard, and I think you're to be commended for recognizing that.
I think it's just paranoia. Like, I used to live the street over from my shop, and my building is an old train station. And like, before I completely renovated it, we had super sketchy wiring in the office and everything. And every time I heard the fire alarm for like our town fire station, I instantly was like, shop's on fire. Like, every time of day, as soon as I heard that, I was like, well, it's up in flames. It is what it is. Now we went through and like redid everything, and all of the power in our offices and the shop is all in conduit outside the wall. It's all got like specific high breakers and everything. And like, right. I just literally had the electrician here the other day because we were adding more heat presses. And I was like, nope, I want these on their own breaker. I want these to be in their specific whatever. I'm not just taking regular like outlets that are for the lights and this and this and this. Like, nope, these are dedicated breakers for a heat press and for this, because if that's plugged in, it's the only thing I want running on that line. Not this heat press is also on this computer, on the lights on the ceiling and on the coffee maker and on this and this. It's like, no, dude, just do one, like, do what it's meant for. And then you're not going to worry if your shop's going to burn to the ground.
Absolutely. You do not want to overload circuits, because overloading circuits, and if you're tripping breakers, that's a formula for disaster. Again, it's playing chicken not with a machine, but you're playing chicken with electricity, and it's not if, it's when.
Yeah.
But yeah, because you create a trip hazard with extension cords, you create a huge fire hazard. You just need to look up on the internet, the power strips that have been caught on fire. And you're right, 100%. A lot of those power strips aren't made here. In fact, I would hazard a guess none of them are made here. They're made overseas. And what's the quality control? There's theoretically ratings on the back of those power strips, and you should read the ratings. Usually, it's the amperage is the big thing, but there's so many things that can overload those quickly on those power strips.
Well, I think a lot of people think that just because there's this little red switch on the end that lights up when you turn it on, that, oh, well, I'm safe because if it overloads, it's just going to kick itself off. And I feel like a lot of these cheapy shit ones is like, that's just an on-off switch, or it's like something that's not actually going to save you. It's just there to make you feel comfortable of like, oh, there's a red light on it. So obviously it's protected.
And have you physically tested those yourself? Have you seen to see if they actually trip out or if they don't? So you're putting a lot of trust. You're putting your entire business and your entire operation into a power strip, and maybe your life on a power strip that came from somewhere overseas that was made with the cheapest labor available. And you wonder what the quality control was like. It's like
you're putting your entire future and career on the line for a $6 power strip that you bought. So anyway, back to the OSHA. Before we get super in the weeds on that, back to the OSHA whatever. Is it mainly just power, like extension cords and stuff? That's kind of a no-no. Is there any other power issue that's
pendant drops are another big one. Well, there's multitudes. Blocking access to a breaker box, having open breakers and breaker boxes, that'll get you immediate $4,000 to $5,000 fine. You can't have any obstructions, and you need a 3-foot clearance in front of all your breaker boxes. Pendant drops. Okay, what's a pendant drop? That's where you're going to drop power down from the ceiling, and you're going to maybe plug in a piece of equipment.
Right.
So the pendant drop needs to have what is called tension relief and spring relief. So you just can't drop a wire out of a box. It has to go, if you've seen like an elbow, that's like a wire mesh, and it hangs so that there's no strain. Because if you're plugging and unplugging, eventually you can pull that cord out of that box and energize the box.
They look like finger traps.
Yeah.
It's just like a cable mesh, basically. So if you tug on it, it stops there and doesn't tug on the actual box.
And on the box itself, you'll see the same setup that's designed to keep the wire from pulling out of the box.
Right.
Now, some boxes actually have that built into them, so you may not actually see the wire. But most importantly, and I see this a lot, is if you're familiar with junction boxes, if you've ever gone to like Home Depot or Lowe's, and you buy a junction box, it's one of the metal ones that have the knockouts in them. Knockouts are like the little metal tabs that are barely on there. You cannot use that as a pendant drop. You have to use a solid box, a solid plastic or metal box. If you have a knockout in a pendant drop, that's another OSHA $3,000 to $5,000 fine, because you can easily push that tab in, and now you're sticking your finger into the live box where you have 120, or it could be a 2, at least 120, maybe a 220 coming down. So OSHA will cite you in a heartbeat. Having knockouts missing on breaker boxes, because the wires go in the bigger boxes, in your control boxes, and missing breakers. I mentioned that. Those are all common, and those will all get used.
But you can replace those with like a plastic cover plate.
Oh, absolutely. For 69 cents.
Just don't leave them wide open.
Yeah, you can go buy a 69-cent cover and save yourself $4,000 or $5,000 fine. I've seen egregious things where I've gone in the facilities and they have all the covers off the breaker boxes, and they're live. I'm like, well, what are these covers off for? They're like, oh, the electrician was here. They're coming back tomorrow. I'm like, you need to have the electrician replace those covers. If you're going to be doing production and you're not turning all the power, like if you're not cutting the main power off and those are live,
it'll kill somebody to just touch those.
Oh my gosh, it's things that I've seen are just crazy.
What about cables on the ground?
Well, that's a trip hazard. And then the other thing too, people love extension cords, and they'll poke holes in the wall and run extension cords through the wall. That's my favorite. That's a double whammy. Or they'll zip tie extension cords or cords to metal framing. That's another big one. in terms of a big OSHA citation. Yeah, and cords on the floor are trip hazards. But the other thing with cords on the floor, I've seen this too. Another, you brought this up. They'll put a cord on the floor. They're afraid it's a trip hazard, so they'll put a rubber mat over the cord. Like, okay, we're not going to trip. The problem is what they don't realize is that as people step on that rubber mat, they break down the insulation on that cord, and eventually you're going to cause a short, a shock, or an arc because you've been stepping on it. So you can't put a rubber mat over a cord. If you have to run cords on the floor, they have hard plastic covers that you can buy that you can put those over those cords if you can't get them off the floor. It's not a trip hazard. And you're not going to damage or destroy the cord. But I've seen so many times where people put rubber mats or whatever because they're thinking, oh, it's a trip hazard, right? I don't want anybody to trip over it. But
what about the difference?
Yeah.
What about the difference between, say you have a drop down cable? Is it any kind of violation to have it where it's just a plug, or it's got to be a twist lock, or it's got to be?
No, you can drop a
specific
receptacle. You can drop whatever you want down from a pendant drop. So
okay, all right.
But it has to be the proper receptacle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I want to get into like water and the reclaim area. Is there anything that's a big no-no with water as far as like drainage or water on the ground, or you have to have this or not have this?
Well, yeah. Well, water on the ground. We were just literally at a plant, not a screen shop last week, and there was a lot of water on the ground. So that's a slip hazard. And that has to.
Is it just to have the rubber mats, like the ones with the holes in them or something? So it's kind of, you have some grip. That's kind of like the only protection for that, I guess.
Absolutely. Yes. And the wastewater, you need to make sure from a discharge perspective that the sewer authority is willing to take that wastewater, from the reclamation area. And I think I mentioned this in my presentation. We recently helped a member that had a citation for their operators in the reclamation area. They were wearing respirators.
I had that as a note to ask you because I'm literally, I brought you up in the shop after that talk because we just hired a new screen tech, which the screen tech is just doing everything to do with screens. They're doing reclaim, coding screens, imaging screens, like the whole thing. So when she was hired, the one thing we were talking about is I kind of brought up, and I knew I was going to be talking to you now, so I kind of wanted to get a little bit more into it, is should she wear a mask or not? And I felt like it was like I wanted to have one here and I wanted to have one available if she chose to use one. But then I remember you were talking about, well, if they're wearing a mask, then it should be, there's all these other things that go into it where it might be better for them to just not wear a mask at all. So I guess elaborate, go into your mask.
Yeah, I was going to say that brings us into the whole PPE. So in other words, in the reclamation, you want to make sure they have gloves and eye protection, especially if they're using a non-automatic system where they're using, using a power washer to do that, because you want to make sure nothing's flying back into their face. But from the mask perspective, the issue is that the printing operation, to their credit, had indoor air quality evaluation done, and it was determined that a respirator wasn't required. But they still let the employees wear a respirator. When I say a respirator, that's a full face mask, they call elastomeric one, which is like the rubber one. And so the problem is when you put that type of face mask on, and you allow your operators to use them either on a volunteer or mandatory basis, that triggers OSHA's regulation where you have to have what's called a medical evaluation and perhaps a fit test. So medical evaluation for sure. If it's voluntary, it's medical evaluation. If it's mandatory, you have to have medical evaluation and a fit test. So medical evaluation, because you're putting something on that restricts breathing, you have to have a doctor or a healthcare professional sign off on an evaluation that it's not going to impact that employee's ability to breathe.
So how does the shop actually do that if they want to do that? Like they have to send an employee with the mask to a doctor to sign off and say that it's okay for them to wear? Yeah,
there's clinics that are set up to do that, and for the medical community to do that evaluation for respirators.
So the other part of that too, which I learned when we first started getting masks in that, it's not just like a dust mask, like, the
Right.
paper mask that goes over your face. This is the one with like the rubber seal around your mouth and nose, and it's got the canisters usually.
Yep.
But the thing is those canisters, like, what kind of one are we getting? Because there's like 100 of them, and there's like some are for dust, some are for like
You have
particles,
to.
some are for chemicals, some
Yes,
are
you have
whatever.
to
Like,
match the canister up with the material that they're being exposed to, whether it's organic. In our case, it's a mixture of usually water and some organic material. So,
but I feel like most of the ones that you go buy at like the hardware store, I went to like Lowe's and bought one. They're almost always like for dust, for like if you were doing sheetrocking or something.
right,
It's not necessarily rated for
chemicals.
some kind of reclaim chemical.
Right. Right. So you have to make sure you have the right respirator that you're going to have. In addition to, like I said, the medical evaluation and fit testing, you have to have a written program, and you have to have a way to store them. I mean, it's an elaborate program for respirators. And then you mentioned dust masks. So dust masks are technically respirators, but if you have a dust mask and you want the operator to wear a dust mask, and you just have them sign off on a sheet of paper. OSHA says you have to give them Appendix B of the standard. So we have a form for that for our members. You just have them sign off that they recognize that they're using a dust mask on a voluntary basis. So if you've determined they're not mandatory, and typically I would say it's unless you have a very, very unique situation where you don't have ventilation and it's an out of the way place, most printers don't it's not required to be wearing respirators, and regardless of the type of shop that you're in. Generally, it's not an issue. But
so if the new hire or whatever wants to use a mask,
right,
and again, it's voluntary, she doesn't need to use it, whatever, I get the proper mask with the proper canisters.
No. Okay. As a respirator, if she wants those, you have to do the medical evaluation. If you want to give her a dust mask or an N95 mask became very popular during COVID. So
yeah.
N95 is a tighter fitting mask. Like a dust mask is pretty loose fitting. I call it kind of loose.
Yeah.
But a N95 is a little bit more form fitting. If an N95 can be used on a voluntary basis, and they can do the Appendix B. If you determine if
they get an N95 mask, all I really need is a written note from them saying it's voluntary and they want to use it because it makes them feel better.
No, you have to give them Appendix B of the standard and have them sign off that you gave them Appendix B.
Right. Well, that's what I mean by like they're just signing away saying that it's okay, they want to use it, whatever.
On a voluntary basis.
But if I put a respirator on them, there's a whole nother they have to go to the doctor and they have to have this, and then there has to be, you said, storage.
Right.
Things.
All that stuff. Yeah.
That sounds like a fucking nightmare.
It is. Yeah. And it's designed. I mean, respirator.
The hard part in reality in a shop is like they feel that like, okay, this is a chemical and I'm spraying it into the air. I'm doing this. Like, I feel like I should have something so I'm not breathing this chemical.
Right.
But it's hard for me as the owner to go out there and be like, nah, you're fine. Like, don't worry. You don't need anything. Like,
right.
I feel like it's just more of like it's something to make them feel better, even if they don't need it. They feel better knowing I'm covered or protected in some way. But again, like if they feel like they want to wear a respirator, now I'm like, well, if you want to wear it, you got to do this, and I have to send you to the doctor, and I have to like put
with the cart,
some kind of storage thing.
One, because the regulations set you up to do that. The first step is to actually have an evaluation done to show that you don't need a respirator. Technically, if you want to be in a safe harbor, you would have an indoor air quality evaluation done to show that respirators aren't required. If someone wants to use one on a voluntary basis, they could use an N95 or a dust mask.
Your recommendation would be to just have them use an N95 and sign this form.
Or if someone wants to wear something, I don't think that they need to wear it. If you do the evaluation, you say, we don't have any concern with exposure, then you don't have to wear anything. What people don't fail to realize is that the human body, we have a pretty good filtration system set up. We don't think about it that way, but we have a very good filtration system set up between our nose and our lungs and the mucous membranes. We have the hairs in our nose. We have the mucous membrane in our sinuses. We have the mucous membrane in the cilia in our lungs. And it's all designed to filter out stuff. You know what I mean? To capture and filter it out.
Yeah.
So we have a pretty good filtration system, but I get that. And I'm working in an environment where there's chemicals. So I'm slightly concerned. So as a shop owner, what I would suggest is that you would have an evaluation done to see, is a respirator necessary?
So who do we call to get an evaluation done?
You can go several different routes. The first one is typically your workman's comp insurance carrier will typically do that. You can call OSHA's consultation program. And I always have a word of caution with OSHA's consultation program. But if you have them coming in just to do an indoor air quality evaluation, they're perfectly fine to do that. It's a free service. OSHA funds. Yeah.
See, what sketches me out, and this is just me being, again, me and paranoid and whatever, is like, it seems like you're poking the bear at that point. It seems like right now I'm not on anybody's radar. I'm just doing my thing. OSHA's not coming here and pissing me off or seeing these things. And then I'm like, hey, OSHA, do you want to come by? I have some concerns with air quality. And they're going to be like, yeah, we can come. It's a free service, blah, blah, blah. And they come here and then it's like 2 weeks later, oh, we're here to do an inspection. It's like, no shit. I called you here. Like, you know what I mean? Now I'm on your list.
The consultation program is independent of OSHA. I'm on the fence with the consultation program. I think they're very good in this particular instance where you want them to do an indoor air quality evaluation. I think if you just invite them in to look around your shop and say, tell us what's wrong, that's a huge mistake. But if you come in and you control them, you want that done because
like put blinders on them and a blindfold me. Like, I just want you to look at this one thing.
Correct. Because what they'll write a report and they'll give you recommendations and you have to follow the recommendations. And there's strings attached because it's a free service. And if you don't follow the recommendations, they could theoretically turn you over to OSHA. That's never happened in my experience. But the programs typically run at, like here in Pennsylvania, which is where I live, it's run by the University of Indiana, and it's not even run by OSHA. OSHA pays the University of Indiana. They send their industrial hygienists out to do the evaluations. So there's no report that goes back to OSHA. There's no communication between OSHA and the consultation program. Mm-hmm. So it's only if you don't follow what the consultation program is recommending. And then the third one is you can hire an industrial hygiene firm, an outside firm to come in and do the evaluation for you. So you can do that too as well.
Okay.
Those are your three routes. But I would say, the other thing, I'm glad you brought this up. Another thing that triggers inspections, you said, did they just show up? And we started talking about the site specific and the national emphasis program on amputations. Employee complaints are now driving a lot of OSHA inspections. So in other words, typically the scenario is that you have an employee that you've disciplined and they don't like it. And so they pick up the phone and call OSHA on you and they make stuff up, or like, hey, they're making people do this, do that. And a lot of times it's not true. It's not accurate, but it triggers an inspection. And while OSHA's there, and this is important to remember, when OSHA's in your shop, anything that they see is a violation. They're required by law to cite that. And so once they're in there, everything's open and fair game. Now sometimes they just look at certain things. Sometimes they look at everything. We had an inspection just wrapped up and we're going to be fighting the citation, but they kept coming back and coming back and coming back. They brought back the industrial hygienist. They brought back the safety person. They brought back this person. And so, 3-4 months later, they wrap up the inspection. And so, it could be a quick hit or it could be long drawn out process. You just never know what's going to happen while they're there.
Again, I'm going to say this where I'm not trying to get away with anything. I'm just saying, like, I watch these videos online or whatever, where it's these lawyers or something talking about, if you ever get pulled over by the police, don't voluntarily give them this information, that information, whatever. Just shut up.
Right.
Like, don't say anything. Just shut, like, whether you're guilty or innocent, whatever, just shut up. And it's like, do you have recommendations like that where if they were to show up on a day, like, don't just necessarily let them in or let them walk the shop or let them do this? Like, are you, do you shut all the lights off in this department? Like, what do we do to be like, hey, like, you put a foot in the door and peek in and say, oh, cool. Well, we'll come back on this day, or how does it
Everybody
work?
hide behind the counter. Don't make it work.
Right.
Yeah. No, basically, OSHA has the authority to come into any covered workplace. Now, you have the right to refuse entry. I don't recommend that you exercise that right unless you have
Right. You don't want to piss them off or make
legal
them
counsel,
feel
right?
sketchy.
Because
Yeah.
what will happen is they'll go back and get a subpoena. I mean, a search warrant. Sorry, not a subpoena. They'll go back and get a search warrant, and they'll be back, right? So they'll get really mad, and then the statistics show when companies do that, the penalties are always a lot higher. So they can come into any covered workplace. There's sometimes that's a good strategy. I don't ever recommend it unless there's something unique going on. But if it's just like they show up to do an inspection, now I've had people say, "Well, I was always told to tell them to go away." I'm like, "No, that's bad."
That's why I'm asking.
Right.
You know, like I want to make sure that Jerry doesn't show up one day and I tell him to go fuck himself, and like I run out and I unplug all the extension cords.
Right.
Like I want to know, like, hey, he's here, he's allowed to do what he is, and I shake his hand, offer him a donut, and get him a drink. Like, what's my go-to here?
Yeah, well, you want to ideally, you can try to delay. A delay tactic is, hey, our safety person's not here. It could be true, or the person handling safety, can you come back at a future date?
And then he comes back the next time, and I have a fake mustache on, and I'm like, yeah, I'm the safety guy who wasn't here last time.
Right. If you have that, if you can delay them, many times that doesn't work. They're like, hey, I'm here. If there's questions, the safety guy, I can catch up with the safety guy. So typically, they have to announce why they're there. They have to say, I'm here for, they just can't come in randomly. There has to be a reason. Employee complaint, or you're on a site specific target.
Okay, so that makes me feel a lot better, is that they have to have a reason. They're not just showing up out of the blue for no reason. Right.
Yeah, there has to be a reason. They have to explain to you the reason why they're there. And at that point, then you have to make the decision, do you proceed or not proceed? Again, I always recommend that you let it proceed, and then you can try to control it as best you can. If you have, a conference room, take them to a conference room. If they're there to see something specific, they'll tell you, hey, I've got an employee complaint. They won't tell you who the complaint was made by, but they'll tell you the circumstances. And then you try to take them, to the most direct route possible. Let them see what they want to see, and then get them back to the conference room. If they want to see your Form 300, your other documents, you can give them the Form 300 other documents, or you may say, hey, we can send those to you. There's only very few things that they will actually demand that you have to turn over at the time of the inspection. Your Form 300 is one of them. But then you can say, if you can send me an email with a list of everything you need, we'll be more than happy to follow up with you on other written programs or training records. When they ask you questions, you answer the questions. You don't elaborate. Now it's not the time to talk.
That's what I'm saying. Say like very little, like yes or no, or just answer what they said. Don't be like, well, there was this one time, or, you should have been here a week ago. There was a hole in the wall over here. It's like, nah, don't just shut up.
And sometimes they'll pump employees for information. So if you have a receptionist, you train your receptionist to not answer any questions, because hey, I heard there was such and such, and then they engage in conversations, get more information about what's going on in the company. Because anything that an employee tells the inspector, they believe 100%. And anything that management tells them, you have to prove it. So even though we're supposedly innocent until proven guilty, OSHA will take the word over an employee over management any day of the week. And so you want to. Now is not the time to make nice with them. You answer their questions. You answer them to the best of your ability. Obviously, don't lie, ever lie. Don't fabricate. There are people just thrown in jail for that. So you never, but you can say, I don't know. That's a perfectly acceptable answer. But don't try to put yourself in a vulnerable position when they're asking questions. And you answer them as honestly as you can.
Right. All right. Say worst case scenario, they show up. They're like, hey, you're fined for this, or you got a violation for this, or whatever. And then they leave the shop. What's the first thing I should do? I know if I'm a member of the alliance, I'm calling you. But I'm saying, what should anybody do, alliance member or not?
Well,
What do
one
we
thing
do
you
if that
should
happens?
do, like during the inspection, if they point something out and you can fix it, you fix it immediately. In other words, like, hey, that covers off the switch or whatever, and you can fix it. You fix it right away. In some instances,
Is that something where he's like, okay, and he like crosses it off his list?
it may not show up on the citation. In other words, like there especially if you, and it's showing cooperation and showing good intent on your part. And so if it's things that can be fixed right away, you fix it right away.
You don't put your hand in your pocket and be like, actually, I have one of those right here. And then you do this and then you just walk away.
Yeah. Not recommended.
Oh, okay. Because I would love to do that.
Yeah, you gotta as much as it. And I mean, I've had people. This is my company. This is my business. They don't have a right to come in here, and I'm like, they do.
Yeah, they're just arrogant. Yeah.
And so you want to be cooperative with them. You want to talk about your safety program, your safety systems, like I said, but you don't volunteer anything. You just answer the questions, answer them as truthfully as you can. And, and if like they're walking through and you can fix things, you fix them right away. So they'll come back, do the assessment, they'll do the walkthrough, they'll sit down with you and do what's called a closing conference. Sometimes the closing conference happens the same day. Sometimes it can happen 6 months from now. But they'll basically say, hey, here's what we're thinking. We saw some things. We may have to do some research, but we may cite you for this, this, and this. Then they go back to their office, and then they will send you a citation in the mail. They have 6 months from the closing conference. You'll get a piece of paper in the mail, or you'll get a letter in the mail, and it's going to be a citation. It's going to identify every regulation that they believe, this is the key word, that they believe you were violating. And so therefore, then they're going to cite the reference. They're going to cite the OSHA regulation. They're going to cite what they saw. And then you're going to get that citation. Then you got a response. You have 15 working days from the point at which you receive that citation to call them and contest it, or to contest the citation.
That's this is a tangent for sure, but this shit pisses me off because I deal with it all the time with like the government and whatever. It's like they take 8 months to respond to any question you have about anything.
Yep.
And then as soon as they get you a piece of paper in the mail, the fucking snail mail shows up and you're like, you have 15 days to respond to this or we're taking your house or some shit.
Yeah.
And it's like, dude, what are you talking? Like you just literally took forever and you fined me that entire 8 months. I was paying penalties and fees for the entire time it took for you to get me this piece of paper. And then you're like, nope, I need this in 10 days or you're screwed. And it's like, anyway, I don't want to go on that tangent. It's just going to piss me off. But anyway.
OSHA, the whole process needs reformed. I'm hopeful that something may happen, at least with the current administration, but you never know.
Sorry, back to the. I'm going to keep us on track.
Yeah. So
I got a fine. I got a piece of paper that says I violated whatever. What do? Do you just fix it? Do you go to somebody who's an expert on this and be like, well, actually, this is okay. We will fight for you on this. We'll do this. Whatever. Yeah. What do you do?
Well, what you need to do is you need to assess to figure out is this really a violation? Is this really did I really break the law or not? And so that's what we help our members do. We help them sort through that. I ask a bunch of questions. We figure out what they were said, what they didn't have, what programs they had in place, things like that. In some cases, if you have to have a written program for HAZCOM, for example, or a lockout tagout, and you don't have a written program, there's not much you can argue. I didn't have one. So what you do in the interim is you meet the requirement, the written program, because your goal, what I always recommend is you contest the citation. You get a chance to have what's called an informal conference. So within that 15 working days, you have to have an informal you can contest the citation. You have an informal conference. At that informal conference, you bring all your evidence and your information to say, this is why we think you're wrong, OSHA, or yes, we agree on this particular instance. Here we have our written program, and then we're going to ask for a penalty reduction. Or we're going to ask, each citation, each violation gets classified as to whether it's considered a serious or other than serious or repeat willful. There's a classification system. You're going to ask for a reclassification of the violation, and you're going to ask for a penalty reduction, or you're going to ask for something to be completely rescinded. If OSHA was completely wrong on what they interpreted you were doing or not doing, you can ask for that being rescinded. And so that's what we do. I help our members a lot with going through the informal process and building a defense to those citations. But fixing as much as you can, as soon as you can, if it needs to be fixed, you bring that evidence with you to the informal. And 9 times out of 10, you're going to get a nice penalty reduction out of that. So it's always worth contesting the citation.
Yeah, I always think of it like if I've had it before too, where I've got a ticket for something stupid on my car, and then I just fix it, and then I go back to the judge or whatever, and I say, "Well, this is already done. Like I took care of it, whatever." They're like, "Okay, cool. Like here's your minimum penalty. Like you're paying the court fee, basically."
Yeah, yeah. So they're usually with small business. They're usually a little bit more cooperative, and I say that with a grain of salt, but typically they tend to be a little bit more cooperative. And I've been in instances where it's been an easy lift, and I've been in instances where it's been a heavy lift with trying to convince them that it wasn't a violation. But that you definitely want to do that. You want to preserve your right to contest the citation. If you go through the informal conference and you still don't like the result, or that they're going to say, "Hey, we're not accepting this. We think this is a violation." You go to the next step, which is the formal notice of contest. And at that point, you're going to go in front of what's called an administrative law judge. And basically, it's just like a court hearing. It's a judge, but all they do is focus on OSHA stuff. And you'll present your case. They'll present their case. You submit briefs. You submit your evidence. The judge will take that into consideration, render a decision. If either party doesn't like that, they can appeal it to the federal court system. And eventually it can go to the Court of Appeals and even to the Supreme Court. So there have been OSHA cases that have gone to the Supreme Court. It's not common, but that's the legal process, that you have, the rights that you have to exercise as you defend yourself against a citation. Sometimes they go to court. Sometimes they go to the appeals court. It's only on really, really big cases that they do. A lot of them go to the administrative law judge, and the administrative law judge will issue their ruling. And then you get into like case law and other things like that. And at that point, I'm not an attorney. I don't, but I would recommend that, you usually at that point, you hire an attorney I can help people up through the informal because you don't need attorneys. In fact, you wouldn't want to bring an attorney to an informal. And there's a lot you can do in the informal conference. There's a lot of negotiation that happens on the informal conferences.
I guess moving forward in that is so have you seen any serious, someone comes in and there's a ton like this in your experience with fighting for these people? Have you found people have gotten off of some pretty serious allegations with that kind of thing? Like they fixed it and they're good, and it's not always doom and gloom, I guess.
Absolutely. Yeah. We've had a lot of success. We've had tremendous success on getting a lot of things rescinded. Because the interpretation of the inspector wasn't accurate. They don't know all the industries. They don't know every industry ins and out. So when you bring the letters of interpretation and you bring other case law that's been settled that looks at your particular set of circumstances, a lot of times we're able to get great movement on these informal conferences. It isn't gloom and doom. In fact, usually we do pretty good with informals. At least if we get things rescinded or we get traumatic penalty reductions occurring. And a lot of that, like I said, it starts at the time of the inspection. If you're cooperative, you show good faith, you fix things. If they point out, that goes in your favor when it comes to the informal and perhaps maybe even to the formal contest period.
If a shop wants to get real serious about compliance and they hear this episode or they get whatever, what is step one in your opinion? Like, is there a course someone can take, or is there a compliance thing other than having this OSHA adjacent company come out and do an evaluation? Is there something they can do?
If they're not a member of Printing United Alliance, they need to join. And we have tons of resources on our webpage. We have OSHA checklists. We have sample written programs. We have templates. We have training materials. I think Adrian may have mentioned our iLearning Plus Center. We have safety courses on our iLearning Plus. We have machine guarding, lockout, tagout, HAZCOM. So we have a lot of resources available to members, and the templates and a lot of the material, safety posters and things like that. That's all free. There is a cost for
Those are free through the Alliance or free from?
No, if you're a member, you have to be a member. And it's like $495 a year to join. So just one of those written programs on an outside vendor is easily $500. And so you have that. And then the iLearning Plus, there is a cost. Those aren't free. There's a cost for each of the courses for that. And then most importantly, you have access to me. You have access to Sarah Osorio, who we didn't mention. She works with me. And then you have access to Adrian. Depending upon what the issue is. Like I said, I work with Adrian on some of these issues. And so, being able to talk through it, I can answer the questions. I can help them out. We can work through these issues and help them, being a member. So to me, that's the first point. And like I said, we have an OSHA compliance checklist that's up there. That's free. So
that's what I want. Yeah.
If you want to know
the posters, I want the checklist.
Yeah.
I just, now after talking to you, like there's things I'm literally going to implement. Like I'm going to talk to production tomorrow and be like, hey, like we should look at that, especially like the colored bottle with the number and the chart on the wall. Like that seems like a quick fix, no problem, no brainer kind of thing. And just having maybe like the, SDS sheets in a thing out, like a binder on the wall and the eye wash thing and like all these other things. What is the best way? I mean, this is a real quick plug for like Printing United, because ever since I've wanted to become a member for a while, and then we went and did the seminar and all this other stuff, and like and talking to you and talking to her, I'm like, I really think it's a great resource. What is a way for someone to get a hold and sign up or get to talk to you about this if they want to?
Well, they can easily they can reach out to me through my email. That's easy, gjones@printing.org. So that's gjones@printing.org. They can call me 703-359-1313. Those are the two easiest ways to get a hold of me. But I'm on LinkedIn, so I've actually had a couple questions recently through LinkedIn. So you can.
Hey, LinkedIn's coming back, man.
Yeah, you can tell I'm a little gray in the top, so I'm not a social media hotshot, so to speak, but I have a LinkedIn account that I use primarily. I'm on Twitter or X now, but not too. Get
off of there. It's a horrible breeding ground.
I don't have like an Instagram. I don't really have a lot of the other. I do LinkedIn because that was more professional.
I think people who are serious about OSHA stuff and want to talk to you aren't going to be hitting you up on X or Instagram. Yeah. They're going to want to like call you or email you. I think
email is the best. Email is always the best way to get a hold of me. So,
all right. Last question before I ask you some personal questions. Do you have any wild OSHA story that you can share that I guess you can share and it's not something you're not supposed to talk about it?
Well, I don't know. A lot of mine are gloom and doom where people are getting really seriously injured. So,
I mean, pick one. I want to hear about something where you're like, I can't believe this happened.
Oh, well, okay. So here's an example. We had a guy, a maintenance person who was replacing a fan belt on a fan on a blower. And so it happened to be outside and it was at the loading dock. And so what the operator did is they had been trained in lockout tagout. So when they went to change the fan belt initially, they locked it out properly through the breaker, which was up on the loading dock, and the fan was down on the ground. And so they went and changed the fan, put the fan blade on. The fan belt. Sorry, put the fan belt on the between the motor and the fan, and then went back up. Unpowered it, took the lock off, powered it back up, went down and checked it, and noticed that the fan belt was loose. And so the same instance we were talking about with your father, just going to be a second. So the maintenance guy went back up to the loading dock area, threw the knife switch, turned it off, and said, I'm just going to adjust this belt. It's going to be real quick. I'm just going to adjust the belt and tighten it. Went down and started to do that. And then at the same time, the person that was in the loading dock area noticed that the knife switch was off and said, this should never be off because this fan has to be on all the time. Went over, threw on the knife switch, turned it on, as you might imagine. It was the time that the maintenance guy was actually doing the adjustment. So, of course, the fan kicked on, the fan belt, which he was adjusting, grabbed his hand, wrapped it around the pulley, and then 2 fingers shot across the parking lot. So it was just something just that quick that happened, and now the guy has a life-altering injury. And that was several years ago at a printing operation. But I have so many stories that are like that, where people
it's always fingers.
Yeah, it's always fingers. We had another woman that was making an adjustment on a 3-knife trimmer. Those are found in commercial printing operations. So if you have a book or a magazine or something, and you need to trim the 3 sides, so a 3-knife trimmer, these are razor sharp blades. Mm-hmm. She had her hand in there. She was making an adjustment to the blade. She was kind of short, so nobody saw her. And then another operator came back and said, hey, this thing should be on, and turned the switch on for it. And the thing cycled. And again, she lost fingers because it cycled as she was making the adjustment on the 3-knife trimmer. So there's just so many of those. And again, it points to the lockout tagout that if you're doing those types of procedures, you got to say, what's going to prevent this machine from starting while I'm in it, or I have my hand in it, or I'm in a vulnerable position. So
it seems like something as stupid as like shut it off and then put a sticky note on it or a piece of paper or something. Like if you don't have a padlock and it's not like you just shut it off, put a note on it and be like, do not turn this on. Yeah. Like, I like my fingers. Please don't touch this. Signed Daryl.
A zip tie, even technically, a zip tie is not going to do it, but even just putting something as simple as a zip tie on it, so nobody can just simply turn the thing on.
It's crazy. All right, I want to do a couple quick takes before we get you out of here. These are more personal questions towards you and I guess your industry. Normally, I ask a printer like, "What's the shirt they're most proud of?" But I'll ask you like, "What's the case that you're most proud of that you helped somebody with or got somebody out of a jam?"
Well, I mean, from a apparel decoration perspective, I would say it was the situation where that woman was injured when she inadvertently stepped on the foot pedal to actuated that pallet. We were able to, the company was cited, but they ended up not paying any fine because we were able to satisfy OSHA by putting some relatively simple guards on, and putting covers on the foot pedals. And so that required some real heavy duty negotiation because they wanted to fine them a lot of money, and it was a small shop. And so that's one of the ones that I think was a great accomplishment. So it was classified as an other than serious, and there was no penalty. And so that's the lowest you can get in terms of a citation.
That was a question that I had for you that I kind of skipped because I feel like we kind of talked about it, but you just brought it up just now. Is like, do you feel like OSHA or this party in OSHA that gives out the fines and whatever has a little bit more grace for, say, a shop of 5 people versus a shop of like 85 people? Of like, this, obviously this company's just getting going. Like, they don't know jack shit. They're just trying to get their feet on the ground. Do they take that into account when it comes to these fines? Because if it was me, I would think, okay, this is a shop of 3 people. And this is a shop of 85 people. The shop of the 85 people knows better. They've been around the block. They've been doing this a long time. They've been whatever. They know better. The 3 dudes in a garage, come on, like, give them something.
Yeah, OSHA typically will, I'll say, cut breaks, and I use that term loosely for the smaller businesses because of that. Like they have in their penalty structure ways to reduce the penalties if you're certain employee size, things like that. But yeah, there is some of that. And I call it the ability to pay. That's Gary's terminology. Yeah. But basically, I've seen the same exact violation at a much larger printing operation, a much smaller operation. The larger operation is paying more money. The smaller operation is paying less money, if that makes sense. Yeah.
I mean, I got hit with a massive fine when I was still like in a garage. There was 2 of us, and it was like, I had an employee, and I think I went like 8 months or a year or something without having like workers' comp or something. And they sent me a notice, and they were like, well, we're fining you $50,000. I was like, I don't have 50, like I have $500 maybe.
Yeah.
Like, what are you, like, I'm new. I did no idea this is something I had to have. I literally just went and got my business name and I started printing, and I sent them this whole thing. And it felt like a mob shakedown where they were like, well, I guess just pay us $1,000 and we'll call it even or something. And it's like, what the fuck? Like, you're just making shit up now. Like, you're like, just give me some hush money and we'll just like, get rid of this. And it's like, I mean, I'm glad I only owed them $1,000 instead of $50,000, but it was still like, dude, give me a break. Like, I had no idea. Like,
I think personally, as much as, I don't know, this is just a personal, as much as in this country, we encourage people to be entrepreneurs. We
get kicked in the teeth so much.
Yeah, it's like my heart goes out for people that are in your position, that have the desire, have the expertise, have that drive to start a business. And I've been doing this now 38 years, and I can just see how it's stacked against business. And
oh, dude,
I think it's just, I think we have to reform this. It has to be reformed. If we want to survive and compete internationally, we've got to change the way we're doing these. I don't disagree with having regulations. I've been in countries just through my career where there were like no regulations, and you're like, oh,
I agree, but it should also be, they should come here and be like, hey, this and this and this and this is wrong. It shouldn't be every shop or every company is terrified of OSHA.
Yes.
It should be, when they come, they're a team that's there to be like, hey, we want to help you get up to snuff. We want you guys to be safe as hell. Like, let's help. Like, here's a program of, you can pay this contractor or something to come in and fix these things. And like, hey, cool, sweet. We can all clap and like we all go away happier and safer. But instead they walk in with a pad and they're like, fuck you for this. You're fine for this.
Yep.
And then they're like, oh, cool. Like I'm terrified.
Yeah. It's a gotcha game. And you have, I personally, I think there should be ideally a one-time through, where they identify things. And if they put you on notice, and then if you fix them, then you're good. And then if the second time through and you didn't keep up your end of the bargain, then there should be some type of enforcement. But I think the cards are stacked against business. And as much as you hear one side of our government saying, and it is true, small business is the heart and soul of our economy. And
then help us out.
Yes. Like just simple communication, like sending out, hey, if you're a small business, and we're OSHA, you have to do the following things. Like OSHA does have a small business handbook. So, there is that, but you have to go find it. In other words, there's like, to my opinion, like a packet. If you get a license for a business, there should be a packet of information that comes with that. As a new business owner, you're starting up a business, keep in mind the following things, and then provide resources. So I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Well, Gary, thank you very much for doing this with me today. Thank you for the reschedule there at the end.
No problem.
You have a ton of knowledge. Again, like I'm signing up for the Alliance, and I would love to talk to you more about some of these checklists and all these other things and get everything up to snuff, because I think you were super helpful, super insightful. And I hope a lot of people don't necessarily be scared of all the OSHA stuff, but more just like informed and wanting to make sure that their people are safe. Because I feel like for me, there is the side of me as a business owner where this whole gotcha thing is scary and I don't want a massive fine. But what I don't want more than anything is an employee that I have and love to get hurt or degloved or chopped in half or some of this other scary shit that you mentioned. So I think that's the biggest thing, is just making sure everybody's good and safe.
And that's what drives me, is I really love our industry. The people that I've met, in the printing industry, it's like the soul of the earth. They're just great people. And I try my darndest to inform our members and keep our employees safe, because ultimately the employees are your operation. Like, you don't have a business without employees. And so you want them to be safe, and be able to go, as they say, go home at the end of the day the same way they showed up. With
at least all their fingers, because all I'm learning from this is that people lose fingers left and right.
Yep.
And what would you say was 80 people a year lose a limb?
Amputations, 80, around 60 to 80 amputations, depending on the numbers. Yeah. And like,
crazy.
in my opinion, like one is unacceptable. We should have 0 amputations.
Yeah, not 80. That's insane.
Yeah.
Well, Gary, thank you very much, man. I appreciate you.
Well, thanks for having me. I enjoyed this. So this was a very.
I feel like we could have gone on like 100 tangents, but I was trying really hard to like keep us.
Absolutely.
I'd love to meet you at like a seminar or something, and we could sit and just like have a drink and talk about all these tangents. It would be fun. All right, man.
Thank you.